everyone, welcome back. So last episode we talked about eating disorders and the importance of professional help. Over the course of the next 2 episodes, we are going to discuss mental health openly and honestly. I'm really excited for this episode because mental health is something that has seriously impacted my life, and so I have a lot to say. Before we get going, let's define mental illness. Mental illness is a condition that affects a person's thinking, feeling, or mood. National Alliance of Mental Illness. In other words, a mental illness is something that can seriously impact the way a person acts or feels. Mental illness can affect anyone, and in fact, having a mental illness is really common. 1 out of every 5 youth will live with a mental health condition, and I'm part of that 1 in 5. When I was younger, I struggled with depression. I noticed that I felt frequently unhappy around the time that I was in 5th grade, but I didn't know what to do, and I didn't want to tell anyone. So instead, I told myself that I wasn't actually that bad, that I would never actually kill myself. And besides, I didn't want to be a burden to anyone, and I didn't want what people thought of me to change once they knew who I actually was. Without me telling anyone, things only escalated and got worse. By the time I was a sophomore in high school, I had reached a point where living life was challenging, exhausting, and felt very dark. And so, at age 15, I reached a point where I was self-harming. To make matters worse, I was spending my time consuming glamorized media that portrayed suicide and self-harm as desirable and attractive. Looking back, I now understand that I was depressed. The National Alliance on Mental Illness defines depression as more than just feeling sad or going through a rough patch. It's a serious mental health condition that requires understanding and medical care. It's true. Depression isn't just feeling sad. It can also make you feel hopeless and unmotivated, and it can change your sleep or eating schedule. When I was depressed, the pain felt all-consuming, and it was so frustrating, feeling like I didn't know how or couldn't get out of this emotional exhaustion. It's also worth noting that there are many different kinds of depression, but common symptoms of depression include changes in sleep, changes in appetite, lack of concentration, loss of energy, lack of interest in activities, hopelessness or guilty thoughts, and suicidal thoughts. After feeling like I was totally beaten down by my depression, I decided that I couldn't live life like this anymore. Something needed to change. So I asked for help. And this is one of the more challenging things that I've done in my life. It was so hard to admit that I needed help, and even harder to share the secret that I had kept to myself for so long. I didn't know how to talk about what I was going through, and I didn't want anyone to feel like it was their fault, and I didn't know what people's reactions were going to be. But I told anyway. And you can, and you should too. After I told, I was fortunate enough to start seeing a therapist. And things started to get a little bit better. And for the first time in my life that I could remember, the darkness started to go away, and it felt like finally I was starting to feel happy. Yet, this isn't where the story ends. In fact, for people who live with a mental health condition, asking for help the first time is usually just the first step in a much longer process. If you struggle with mental health, like I do, you're probably going to need to ask for help more than once. As I got older, I felt mostly happy, but there were some times when I would be asked to do a simple task, like laundry, and I would get really overwhelmed and I would start crying. So I figured it would be a good idea to check in with a psychiatrist or a mental health professional. And this doctor diagnosed me with bipolar disorder 2, or a super complicated way of saying that my mood goes in ups and downs. A lot of people think that bipolar disorder means that you are happy one second and then you're screaming and really mad the next second. I used to think that too, but that's actually not how it works. Bipolar disorder means that your mood changes in a cycle, maybe every couple of weeks, maybe every couple of months. It depends on the person. NAMI describes bipolar disorder as a mental illness that causes dramatic shifts in a person's mood, energy, and ability to think clearly. Now, there are 2 different parts to the bipolar cycle. The first is depression, which we talked about earlier, and the second is mania. Mania is an elevated, high kind of mood, and sometimes it could lead to risky, impulsive decisions. For me, during my depressed periods, I'll sometimes sleep for 10 hours a night and then follow it with a 2-hour nap after drinking coffee. And then sometimes putting on makeup and even showering is too much of a struggle. During my manic episodes, though, I don't need a lot of sleep, and I feel like I'm on top of the world, and I have racing thoughts that overwhelm me, and I'm crazy productive. After being diagnosed with bipolar disorder 2, other specified, I was given a medication that stabilizes my mood and emotions and enables me to live a positive life. Although sometimes I've had to make adjustments to the medication because it stabilized me too much, overall, it does its job, and it does its job well. The resources that I have been fortunate enough to have, including my medication, are the reason why I am alive today. So that's been my experience with mental illness. There are lots of other kinds of mental illnesses, though, including anxiety disorders. And in fact, anxiety disorders are the most common mental health concern in the US. We're going to talk a little bit about anxiety, and then we'll wrap up. Now, having an anxiety disorder is different than feeling a little nervous before giving a presentation. It's when feelings of intense dread and fear prevent a person from doing everyday activities. There's a couple different kinds of anxiety disorders, but they all have one thing in common: persistent, excessive fear or worry in situations that are not threatening. Here's what the National Alliance on Mental Illness lists as common symptoms for anxiety disorders. Emotional symptoms: feelings of apprehension or dread, feeling tense or jumpy, restlessness or irritability, anticipating the worst and being watchful for signs of danger. Physical symptoms: pounding or racing heart and shortness of breath, sweating, tremors and twitches, headaches, fatigue and insomnia, upset stomach, frequent urination, or diarrhea. Okay, wow, that was a lot of information. But believe it or not, that's actually just the beginning, and there is so much more to learn about mental health. This brings us to next week's task. Go to the National Alliance on Mental Illness website and explore different mental health conditions. Because we only explored 3, and not even that deeply, and there's so much more to understand and to learn. Maybe just spend 20 minutes looking at different kinds and take notes on what you think is important. This also brings us to our next workshop, in which we'll talk more about how to help yourself and how to help your friends. I'll see you then.